Very good morning, students. So once again, we are here with one of the major topics in MSc, and that is the comparative anatomy of the aortic arches. So in the previous lecture, in this part, we had discussed the modifications of the aortic arches. In the case of fishes, we had taken the case of the Dipnonians, where we don't had number 1, number 2, and number 5 arch in that particular case. So what the number was in case of Dipnonians, it was 3, 4, and 6. So in that particular lecture, we had talked about that why these are 3 in number, because the number 3 arch was making the carotids for the head part. Number 4th arch was making the systemic aorta that were going to the body parts. And if we go for the 6th aortic arch, that was forming the pulmonary aorta, that was for the oxygenation of the blood. So these were the 3 arches that we had discussed in the case of the Dipnonians. Now students, if we go further in the case of the amphibians, so here we are starting with the case of the amphibians, that how the aortic arches they have developed in these cases. So now we are taking up the amphibians into account. Now students, in the case of amphibians, we are dividing them into urodeles and the other group. So here we are starting with, first of all, the urodele part. So in this case, what we have is that there are 4 pairs of aortic arches. So these are number 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now these are the aortic arches which are present over here in general. So this is a general term, you can say this is a general number in case of these animals. So we have number 3, number 4, 5, and 6, as we have seen in the cases of fishes. So these are the 4 numbers. Now if I go further into this particular slide, the 5th pair is absent in some of the cases. Now it is absent in the siren, and I have taken another example of amphima. So the 5th pair, it is absent in siren and amphima. So here also one thing is to be mentioned, that the 3rd pair, it forms the carotid arteries, and the 4th pair, it forms the systemic arches. So this is very clear, I think, to you, that the 3rd pair, it is making the carotids for the head, which is going to the brain, and 4th pair is making the systemic arches. Now, if you recall the heart of the amphibians, you have got a kind of double circulation. So that's why we are making 2 systemic arches, left and the right over here, and they are formed by the 4th arch. And the 6th arch, it is making the, you can say, the pulmonary artery that will be going to the lungs. Now here, this is a very, very important thing to note, that the radix or the lateral aorta, I will be showing you in the diagram also, between the 3rd and the 4th arches, they may persist as a vascular connection called as the ductus caroticus. Now this is a very, very important thing. So first of all, I should give you some idea about the 6th one also. Then I'll be taking this point. So the 6th pair, the last pair, it forms the pulmonary arteries which are supplying the blood to the skin and the lungs. Now here we should emphasize on to the skin also, because in amphibians the blood is also going to the skin for oxygenation. So that's why the pulmonary arteries which are made by the 6th arch, they are going into 2 fates. Number 1, they are going into the skin or the buccopharyngeal lining, and second is to the lungs. So these are made by the 6th pair of the aortic arch, as we have discussed in the previous sections also. Now students, if we take up the next point, it retains the connection with the radix aorta. Now the sixth arch, I am talking about the sixth arch, that it is retaining the connection with the radix aorta. So I'll be showing you that how it is retaining this particular connection. Now in this particular diagram, first of all, you can see we are taking up these 2 points. Number one is the radix or the lateral aorta between third and fourth arches. Next point is it retains the connection. That means the sixth arch, it retains the connection with the radix aorta. So in this particular diagram, you can very well see, first of all, the arch number 1 and the arch number 2, they are absent. So we are having a number which is 3, 4, 5, and 6. So that means we are not having number 1 and 2. Now next thing is that arch number 3, it is making the carotid arteries which are going to the head part. So here you have the external carotid, 2 external carotids, and 2 are the internal carotids which are formed by the third pair of the arches. So the blood will be flowing to the head part. Now next thing is that the fourth pair is making 2 systemic arches. This is the one systemic arch and this is the second systemic arch, which are formed by the fourth aortic arch. Now next we have the fifth one. This fifth arch is a reduced arch, but it is present in this particular case. But this fifth arch is also absent in the siren and amphibia. So we have taken it in the second point. So here it has been shown as the reduced fifth arch. Now if I talk about the sixth one, this sixth arch is forming the pulmonary, you can say the cutaneous artery. It is going to the lungs and the skin. So it is the pulmocutaneous artery which is going to these 2 seats of oxygenation. Now here, now I am taking the particular part of the third and the fourth arch and what are the lateral aorta. Now here you can very well see there is a connection between the dorsal aorta from third to fourth. There is a connection. But you will see that this particular connection will be lost in the coming animals. So this is the particular connection which we are talking about in this point. So the radix or the lateral aorta between third and the fourth arches may persist as vascular connection called the ductus caroticus. So this duct is called as the ductus caroticus. And if I take this particular thing, this point, and this is about the sixth arch, and this is giving you a point that the sixth arch is having a connection with the dorsal aorta, and this is called as the ductus arteriosus. So these are the 2 ducts which are present over here, and you will be seeing that these 2 ducts will be diminished in the coming animals. So first is this duct in between third and fourth. This is the ductus caroticus, and in between sixth arch and the dorsal aorta, this is the ductus arteriosus. Now students, there is one thing which is very, very important to note, that suppose this is the blood which is going into the head side, into the carotids, and now it is flowing into the internal carotids also. And from this ductus caroticus, it can come back into the dorsal aorta. So in the coming animals, you will be seeing that this ductus caroticus, the point in between third and the fourth arch, will be lost, and the whole of the blood which is going into the third arch, it is only going to the head part. It cannot come back into the dorsal aorta towards the body side. So that is a kind of modification that there is a, you can say, proportion of the blood that is always and always going to the head part. So that is isolated kind of system which will be formed by the third arch and the carotids, and that will be totally isolated from all of the rest of the arches. So that is, you can say, the efficiency of the removal of the ductus caroticus in the coming animals. Now students, if we go further, after urodeles we have the anurans. So in anurans, what we have is that in this particular case, after the metamorphosis, the gills are lost. So here we have the first, second, and fifth aortic arches disappeared. So what we have is number 2, not number 2, it is number 3, 4, and 6. Now if we go further into this particular thing, so thus there are 3 pairs of aortic arches functional in general. But in case of urodeles, we have got 4 functional aortic arches, but here we have 3. So these are number 3, 4, and 6. Now if we go further, the carotid arch, it takes oxygenated blood to the head region. So as we have discussed in the previous slides, and that will be found from the third arch. Systemic arch on each side, it contributes to the dorsal aorta to distribute the blood elsewhere except the head and the lungs. So now here, the systemic arch will be formed by the fourth arch, and it will be exclusively giving the blood to the body. The carotid arch will exclusively be giving the blood to the head part. And if we go further, the pulmonary arch, it is supplying the venous blood exclusively to the lungs. And this is, I think, an important feature which was absent in the urodeles. Now, the ductus caroticus and the ductus arteriosus, they are gone together. And what we have is number 4, 3, 4, and 6. So we don't have 1, we don't have 2, we don't have 5 even. So in this particular case, now here you can very well see there is no ductus caroticus. So there is no connection in between the third and the fourth arch. So that is lost. So that's how we can say that the blood which is flowing to the third arch, it is only and only going to the head regions. It is not coming back to the dorsal aorta. If I go for the fourth pair of the arch, this is the systemic arch. It is coming back and it has got no connection with the sixth arch. So that was the ductus arteriosus, that is also lost. So here there is no first, no second, no fifth, no ductus caroticus, no ductus arteriosus. That means these are the 3 arches which are fully functional and which are very, very exclusive for their proper functioning. And their target, you can say, systems, they are very, very exclusive and fixed. So I don't want to recall, but still, if you go for the third arch, it is making carotids. Fourth, systemics. Sixth, pulmonary arch. Now students, if we go further, now this is a very, very important line that I have taken, that according to Kent and Miller, the adult anurans, they have 3 pairs of aortic arches, which are the third, fourth, and sixth, which are also retained by the amniotes of the higher vertebrates. So that means that these 3 arches, these are retained by the higher animals also. These are going up to the mammals. Now, if we take the case of the reptilians, what we have is that in this particular part, The reptiles, they are fully terrestrial vertebrates in which the gills they disappear together and they are replaced by the lungs. So we don't have gills in case of the reptiles. So here we have the primary seat of oxygenation as the lungs. Now, in this particular case, what we have that there are only three functional arches. So these are the same as we have seen in the anurans. Now, these are the third, fourth, and the sixth pairs. So, if I go further into this slide, so the right systemic arch from the fourth, because systemic arches they are formed by the fourth pair of the arches. So they arise from the left ventricle carrying the oxygenated blood to the carotid arch. So this is a very, very important thing. And third, to be sent to the head. So this is an important thing. That means the right, you can say, the systemic arch from the fourth pair, it arises from the left ventricle. So I'll be showing you in the diagram. If I go further, the left systemic arch, which is formed by the fourth, it leads from the right ventricle carrying the deoxygenated blood or the mixed blood to the body through the dorsal aorta. So, as we have seen in the reptiles, in the case of crocodiles, we have a connection which was, you can say, the foramen of Panizza. If you recall the evolution of the heart, I was telling you over there that we have a foramen of Panizza where the two left and the right systemic arches, they, you can say, unite together. They are joined together. So, if we take that particular case, so number 3 point and the 4 point will be clear. And if I take the sixth arch, it is the pulmonary trunk that is arising from the right ventricle, carrying the deoxygenated blood to the lungs for purification. So students, if I take this particular diagram, here you can very well see that. Now here we have three arches, or you can say three kinds of the arches which are going out of the heart. So here this is the heart. What we'll be having is that from the right side. So here, if you see this particular diagram, if you take the right ventricle into account, so we have got two arches which are coming out from the right ventricle of the heart. The first arch is the pulmonary trunk from the right arch or from the right ventricle, and we have the left systemic from the right ventricle. So in the diagram also you can very well see that the right ventricle is giving off two arches. It is number 4th and number 6th. Now, if you read the third point, this will be very clear to you that the right systemic arch is this arch. Right systemic, it arises from the left part of the heart, from the left ventricle, and it is carrying the oxygenated blood from the fourth to the body and from the third to the head part. So this is having a connection with the left ventricle. And if you go for the left systemic arch, which is this, and it has origin from the right ventricle. So left systemic arch, it leads from the right ventricle and it is carrying the deoxygenated blood to the body, or this is the mixed blood through the dorsal aorta. So this is the dorsal aorta. So it is coming from the right ventricle and it is taking the partially deoxygenated blood to the whole of the body. From this arch, from the right arch, we have the oxygenated blood coming to the body. Because this part has got the oxygenated blood and this part is having the deoxygenated blood. So there is a connection that the oxygenated blood will flow to the right arch and the carotids. The left arch will be having the deoxygenated blood, and the pulmonary arch, the last part, it is also rising from the right ventricle and it is taking the blood to the lungs. So this is the case of the reptiles, that from the right ventricle we have got two arches, which is the right systemic and the carotids, and from the right we are having the pulmonary arch and the left systemic. So that was the case of the reptiles. If I go further into birds and mammals, now there is a kind of similarity in the scales also. So here what we have is that the birds and the mammals, they are warm-blooded animals, because in both the ventricle is completely divided so that there is no mixing of the oxygenated and deoxygenated bloods. So both the streams, they are kept separate with the maximum efficiency. So that has enhanced the capability to be homeostatic in temperature. Now here the sixth arch, it develops in the embryo, but only three arches. The third, fourth and sixth, they persist in the adult. So again we have the six arches, the primitive plan in the embryo, but only the three arches will be functional in case of the adults. Now here students, this is the third arch. This is the third pair which is forming the carotid. The fourth pair is forming the systemic. So here we have the, you can say the left systemic. This is the left systemic, which is taking the oxygenated blood to the body. Now if I talk about the sixth arch, it is forming the pulmonary arch, and that will be taking the deoxygenated blood into the lungs. So if I go further in this particular case, so there is a single systemic aorta right in the birds and left in the mammals. So this is a very, very important thing to note. So if I take the case of the birds, it is the right systemic aorta which is present. So here we have the right systemic aorta in case of the birds, which is going to the body. But if I take the case of mammals, it will be the left systemic aorta which is taking the blood to the body. Now this systemic aorta, from here, it is originating from the left ventricle that is carrying the oxygenated blood. So this is an important thing. So if you assume the heart to be over here, so this arch is going from the left ventricle, and this arch, the pulmonary arch, is coming out of the right ventricle. So that's why it is having the deoxygenated blood. So this is the course of the oxygenated blood from the left ventricle to the body. And if I go further, the subclavian artery present on the left side in the birds and on the right side of the mammals. So these are the two different, you can say, structures in the case of the birds and the mammals. So here if you go for the subclavian, so here we have the right subclavian artery, and this is present in the mammals. So if you are taking the case of birds, it will be present on this side. So this is the right subclavian artery in case of mammals. And if I go further into this slide, the third arch, it represents the carotid arteries. If I talk about this third arch, they are all together making the carotid arteries which are going to the brain. And they arise from the systemic aorta. Now this is a very, very important thing. there is no independent kind of aorta which is going into the third arch like this, but they have a connection here with the systemic aorta. So first of all, there will be a single aorta which is coming out. It is going to the body taking the oxygenated blood, and from here also the blood will be flowing into carotids like this. That means they have a connection which is present with the systemic arches. So this is an important connection. So we have the external carotids and we have the internal carotids. So as we have discussed in the previous slides. Now if we talk about the sixth arch, it arises from a single pulmonary trunk taking the deoxygenated blood from the right ventricle to the lungs. So this is the single trunk which is taking the deoxygenated blood from the right ventricle of the lungs, of the heart to the lungs. So this is the arch which is made at the sixth arch level. So students, if we compare the birds with the mammals as per their arches, so what is the difference? This is a diagram that you can have here in this part. So here you can very well see that the arches, they are all together a mirror image kind of a thing. Now here if you take the case of the birds, we have the left subclavian and here we have the right subclavian in the case of mammals. And if we take the systemic arches, we have got the left systemic arch over here, we have the right systemic arch over here. So if you take the carotids into account, these are quite similar in the case of the birds and the mammals. So here we have number 1, 2, 5 absent. Same in the case of the birds, we have absent. If you take the case of the dorsal aorta, on the left side it is absent in birds, on the right side it is absent in mammals. So this is a comparison of both the birds and the mammals. So as a whole, I think now you have understood the topic of the aortic arches, how they have developed, what is the primitive plan, how they modify, and you have seen that in evolution the number of the aortic arches, they have reduced in the number, and ultimately in the you can say top in the evolution, we have got number 3, number 4 and number 6 as the functional arches in case of birds and mammals. The only difference is in the position of the subclavian and the systemic arches. Otherwise, altogether, all the other things, they are very, very similar. So students, that was all about the aortic arches and their evolution. So this is again a very important question in your examinations. So be prepared with all the diagrams and all the descriptions of these diagrams. You have to give it in your examinations. Thank you.